couldn't join us today. Okay, great. So yes, we'll be recording this. So keep that in mind if you want to do cameras off or however, whatever you feel most comfortable with. But this will be available on our YouTube channel, and we can also share these slides out with everyone who's registered and attended. Okay, so sometimes we get this question about like what is community storytelling? So for the purposes of this fellowship, we've come up with some sort of like loose definitions. And when we say community, what we're talking about is any group of people who share a common experience. That could be due to where they live, so geographic similarities, the languages, the language they speak, their race, their religion, age, culture, or another attribute. And then when we say story, what we're talking about is really any genre of nonfiction stories that are conveyed through either writing, photos, audio, video, comics, or another medium. So we've worked in the past with fellows who've worked in sort of narrative nonfiction or creative nonfiction, narrative journalism or first-person journalism, more traditional journalism and reporting, of course, audio, video. We've worked with comic artists before. Essentially, it just has to be true stories that are shared through any number of medium. And then this question, going back, this question we also get, sorry, my slides, there we go. Who should apply? Or if you're wondering, okay, this sounds like a cool opportunity, am I right for this fellowship? We have just a few kind of basic criteria. So the eligibility, again, it's open to any storyteller or media creator who intends to produce nonfiction stories. In terms of experience, we don't require any previous publishing experience in order to be awarded this fellowship. But as far as skills, we do want applicants to be able to demonstrate that they have sort of the necessary skills to be able to complete their proposed project. So in the case, say you're proposing to work on a sort of video or documentary series, we'd like to see some past experience or demonstrated skills of what you've worked on in that video medium previously. And if you're wondering what this application process looks like, the application is relatively short. And you'll see questions there about basically three questions about one, the community that you're hoping to focus on and how you're connected to that community. The second thing that we'll be asking you is what kinds of stories that you hope to tell and in what medium you'll be working, or if it's multiple media. The third is just a place to share your work samples or past projects. And what we're looking for in these applications is really sort of specifics and detail. So we consider strong proposals ones that provide specific details about the stories that you're intending to tell. We know that this is just a proposal, so nobody is like, held to be super committed to the stories that they outline in their proposal. But a more specific and sort of fleshed out story idea is going to be a little bit more easy to get excited about than something that's really general or broad or vague. And then, we really want to see kind of a painted picture of what these stories might look like. We're also going to be looking for how the applicant, has a connection to the specific community. Some of those connections are going to be inherent, like you live in the same community as the community that you're talking about. And some of it might not be as clear. So we just want to have a sense that you know this community, that you have established relationships and trust built in, especially if that community might be hidden or somehow hard to reach in some way. And then the last thing that we really are looking for is a sense of how this project that you're proposing how you'll be able to complete it within the 11-month fellowship timeline. So again, details are helpful. If you're working in a more technical medium, it would be helpful to know sort of the skills that you've used before if you're going to be working with outside collaborators or contractors to work on these. So we just want to have that sense of how you'll be able to do the things that you're hoping to do, because we want this to be a successful fellowship for you as well.
Okay. And you might have noticed in the information that Karina just shared, we are attempting to address some frequently asked questions that we receive. If any other questions come up for you as we're moving through this information, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we can address them at the end. We'll also have some time to address and invite questions in real time at the end of the session. So just some information about the timeline and key dates for the fellowship. Oh,
Sorry, Yali.
slides, that's okay.
I'm getting them back. Um, there we go.
Okay, great. Okay, so the fellowship is open now. Applications are due by October 1st. Later in October, a review committee will read all of the applications we receive and meet to discuss them. That committee is going to be made up of Oregon Humanities staff, board members, and some external reviewers with expertise in different areas. Finalists will be contacted in November for Zoom interviews, and the 6 fellows that we select will be notified in December. Fellows will be announced publicly in Oregon Humanities Communications in January. And the onboarding process with Oregon Humanities staff will also begin in January. The final date for fellowship projects to be completed is December 1st, 2025. And in terms of project deliverables for the fellowship, we typically say it's a little hard to quantify exactly how much work goes into a fellowship project because all the projects are so different. But we give an estimate of 100 hours between January and December 2025, producing something on the order of 3 substantial stories. Again, this number is not an upper or lower limit, depending on the nature of the project and the media. More or fewer finished pieces may be appropriate, and fellows will work with the Oregon Humanities editor on their team to determine exactly how many is appropriate for them.
So this fellowship does come with a couple of kind of built-in supports and resources. We'll go over these kind of really broadly now. As Ali mentioned, each fellow works with primarily one editor from our team. We're working with you to both develop a timeline and sort of a plan for your project, and also we're working on the stories themselves before they get shared out into our various publication channels. And typically our editors, we try to work or meet, in some capacity around once a month. It doesn't always happen that way, but we sort of have somewhat regular check-ins with our fellows to talk about their projects and the challenges that they're running into, as well as the specific stories that they're working on at the time. The other piece of this is a mentorship. So fellows are able to choose an outside mentor or advisor. Some fellows choose mentors based on a particular support that they're looking for in a technical field. That might be someone that they'd really like to get more support around video editing, but they can also choose them based on just someone who can provide overall guidance on their project. We also, if fellows are not sure about who they want to work with as a mentor, we're totally happy to help brainstorm and come up with ideas. But we kind of allow people to run with somebody that they know or that they're excited about. And then that mentor receives a $500 honorarium, which is a separate honorarium. It's not part of that $5,000 honorarium that the fellow will receive. We also provide reimbursable funds for travel, equipment, and technical assistance. So some of those expenses that you might run into over the course of the fellowship, we can reimburse you for. That includes auto travel, as well as airfare or other transportation, up to $250 a trip. We also provide reimbursement for lodging and meals if you're traveling to report or work on a story. We'll cover equipment rental charges for camera cameras, microphones, any other thing that you might need or want to work on your stories. And we'll also provide funds for payments to subcontractors that you might be working with, such as photographers, producers, video editors, or even the interview sources that you're working with. And just a note about the funding, in past years, we have been able to budget $1,200 per fellow for these reimbursable funds. Our budget is not finalized at the moment, but we expect that that amount will sort of stay pretty much the same for those extra costs.
Okay, another question that we sometimes receive is where will these stories appear? So the primary vehicle for publishing written stories will be our magazine, which is published 3 times a year on specific themes. And we can work together to discuss how specific projects could meet the themes that have already been established. We also have a online essay series called Beyond the Margins, and I call it an essay series, but we also publish comics, videos, and other media in that space. It's really just our online publication. We also have a podcast and radio show called The Detour. And in the past, fellows have produced segments specifically for the podcast, so that is an option. We also have a YouTube channel, social media, and we make attempts when appropriate to co-publish with other publications in Oregon. So some of the magazines and outlets listed here are ones that we have co-published with in the past.
Sometimes we get asked how this fellowship or if the fellowship can be used to sort of support an ongoing or existing project that someone is working on. So that's totally an option to sort of either pursue a new project or to use these funds to support work that you've been doing, say on a web series, a podcast, a community archive. This is, again, we're totally open and encouraging of this, just as long as the fellow is able to meet those deliverables that we talked about earlier, the rough estimate of 3 substantial stories that we're publishing on our channels. So as an example of how we've done this in the past, in 2022, we worked with the community storytelling fellow, Bruce Poinsett, who's a multimedia journalist. He works in audio and video formats, as well as traditional written journalism and reporting. And in his proposal, he stated that he wanted to use the fellowship to help create stories for a web series that he's been producing for a number of years called The Blacktastic Adventure, which tells stories about, it's an interview series that he publishes on YouTube about the Oregon's Black diaspora. And so for his fellowship, he created 3 stories that were all turned into episodes for his web series. One of those was a story in which he traveled to Eastern Oregon to interview Black residents who lived in rural communities and sort of tell the story of their families and how they arrived there and their experiences. So he traveled with a small crew to film that episode, and then he published that on his web series. And then the fellowship component of that for him was that he wrote a roughly 3,500 word feature story about that experience, traveling, filming. He included some of the voices of the folks that he interviewed in that story, and we published that in our magazine. Another example of this that he did was he filmed the photo that's on this slide. He filmed a roundtable discussion that was intended to explore the dynamics within the Black community in Portland between people who had sort of newly arrived to the city and those who had been longtime residents. So in addition to the episode that he filmed, he then, along with one of his collaborators, Intezar Abioto, he had a discussion on our podcast, The Detour, and they sort of explored that initial conversation, the roundtable discussion, in more detail and in more depth. So sort of he sort of created sort of secondary stories or two stories for each sort of theme and idea. So it is a little bit of more work, of course, but it's totally encouraged and acceptable for you to pursue that route if that's something that you're interested in.
Another question that we've received is whether an organization or a group can apply for a fellowship. And the answer is yes. Collaborations are very welcome. We've received applications from community groups, organizations, and schools in the past. One thing that we recommend for these kinds of collaborative applications is that the person who's compiling the application for the organization or group identifies one or two people as the project leads, while of course acknowledging that the stories will be drawn from a larger group or community. We want there to be continuity throughout the fellowship, so the project lead should plan to work on the project for the entire 11 months. And the project lead should ideally have the skills, creative and technical skills to produce the stories that are outlined in the proposal.
Okay, this is the part of the day where we turn to you and see what questions are floating around for you. So if you'd prefer to ask them in the chat, that's totally fine. Or if you'd like to come off of mute, you can, yeah, any way you'd like to ask your questions. Or Ali, do we have any in the chat at this point?
Yeah, we have one, and that is the emphasis on a community that is distinctively Oregon. And the answer to that, or my answer to that, I'll let Karina weigh in as well, but is that we have had many fellows who have interviewed people outside of Oregon and have looked at communities that aren't necessarily exclusive to the state of Oregon, but cross state lines and in some cases national lines. The focus really should be on the community having a strong connection to the state of Oregon and the person who's submitting the application to have a strong connection to the state of Oregon.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have anything to add to that, Ali. I think as long as there's some footing in Oregon for that community, it doesn't have to be solely located here, but to have some connection is key.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions coming up in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Lisa asked, are we allowed to share our end product on our own, our website, social media, etc.? Who owns the final product? The fellow will own the final product of everything that they produce through the fellowship. We are, through the fellowship, buying the right for first publication in our various channels. But the fellows will absolutely be able to share their work on their own channels and even, as we mentioned, cross-publish in other publications if they'd like to. We have one more question. Are all three pieces of work to have a common theme? The pieces don't necessarily have to have a common theme, but they have to have a common thread. So ideally that thread will be the community that the fellow is planning to focus on. But in terms of subject matter for each piece, they can be very different. And Karina, are there any specific examples that come to mind for you of pieces with different themes but a shared thread?
I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking pretty much every fellow has kind of yeah, had, there's been sort of a wide exploration of the community and certain issues that they're exploring. So yeah, I don't have any that come to mind. They're pretty much all fall in that line. So I will say we do have the one aspect of our work that sort of operates within a theme is our magazine. If people aren't familiar, each issue is centered around a theme. And so, it's not typical for a single fellow to publish more than one story in over the course of the year to appear in several issues of the magazine. Typically, we reserve sort of one spot for each fellow throughout the course of the year. But if you're curious or just want to kind of get a head start or in thinking about those themes, they're available on our website under like our submission opportunities page, and we can link to that in the chat as well if people want to take a look at that. And even in those cases, like the theme is sort of it's very loosely and kind of broadly interpreted. Things don't have to be an exact fit for the pieces to be included in that issue.
We have a question about using the final product from a fellowship to fundraise for a cause. Ariella, I might need to check on that and get back to you. I believe that would be fine. We just haven't encountered this question before, so I just want to check on that to make sure. But thank you for asking.
Cool, thanks.
We have a question about the additional funds. So can the additional funds be used to pay an honorarium to story subjects and storytellers that would need to come, or would that need to come from the $5,000 to use as we see fit? So the $1,200 can definitely go towards paying an honorarium to interviewees for the pieces that the fellow is planning to produce. Definitely, like many of our fellows have used that funding to compensate interviewees for their time and expertise. If the storyteller was going to be more substantially involved in the project, I would say that it might make more sense for that to come from the $5,000. So for example, if you were teaming up with someone else, a team of 2 storytellers for the project, we have had fellows that have split the $5,000 honorarium among 2 or 3 people. We have a question about word counts for the application. I would say we don't have a recommended word count. There's no expectation for it to be a specific length. As Karina mentioned earlier, what we're really looking for are the details, and those are going to be the most kind of compelling pieces as we look through the applications. But yeah, I would say typically like a paragraph or 2 paragraphs for each answer is totally appropriate. And a question, if we choose a mentor to receive the $500 honorarium, can they also be featured in the stories we produce as a source? Yes, absolutely. We have had fellows do that in the past. And I think it often makes sense to have the mentor be someone who's very involved in the community that you're writing about. And so it makes sense for that person to be a source. And you could definitely use the additional funding to compensate them for additional time spent on the project. Danielle asks, if I have a video maker or editor I use locally, can the $1,200 be used to help compensate them? Yes, it definitely can. We just want to make sure that the expenses are approved with the editor that you're working with, like early on in the fellowship. So just to ensure that there's enough funding for all phases of the project. If the $1,200 was used for a single payment for a video maker or editor, there wouldn't be additional funding available for travel or other expenses. So just want to make sure that you're mentioning that to the editor that you're partnering with. And can presentations be used as work samples? Yeah, absolutely. Work samples for the application. Feel free to come off mute if you have.
Yeah, I'm coming off mute.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
I think she said yes. So that ideas, yeah, work samples are totally fine, or presentations are fine to share as work samples. Mhm.
Okay, and maybe that's a good point to invite anyone who would like to come off mute to just go ahead and pop in if you have questions that you'd like to ask now. Otherwise, someone asked whether these slides would be made available, and they will. We will share the recording link with everyone who registered for this session, as well as the slides in case they're useful. And all of the information that we covered here is also on our website. So you should be able to find anything you need if there's something that you want to revisit.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, yes.
Salam Karina, Alexander, and the 380,000 people on this call this morning. My question is, to what degree are you folks comfortable working with us on questions about the application? I mean, giving us direction, suggestions, and so on.
I would say we're happy to provide support if there are questions that anybody has at any point about how to submit or what a question is intending to ask. We won't be able to provide like feedback on an application before you're submitting it, something like that. I think the best resources really are taking a look at our website to see some examples of like past stories that have been published as part of this fellowship. It's a great place to sort of get a sense of what this might look like. But yeah, if there's any questions at any stage, we're happy to jump in and talk with anybody about it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll give it another minute or so in case anyone else wants to pop in with a question. Please feel free. Otherwise, we will wrap up a little early, and we can share these resources with you. If you have a specific question about anything that was covered today, please feel free to email me, alexandra@oregonhumanities.org, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Oh, Can we put these links in the chat? Yes. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. Karina, could you put the links in the chat for these, the application and the website?
Oh, sure, yes. Sorry, I couldn't see the chat.
No problem.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Super
Thank you for
helpful.
joining us. Mhm. Looking forward to reading your applications. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.